Okay, Bob, so we're live.
We are live.
We're live on Realtors and Cars Drinking Coffee.
There you go.
There's a show, Jerry Seinfeld, called Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee or Drinking Coffee. They go, they take a classic car and they go and a couple of comedians, Jerry Seinfeld picks up a comedian like Ricky Gervais or somebody like that,
Mm-hmm.
and they go and they get coffee and they just talk about just whatever. And they always have some vintage car. So this is a little less interesting this way. This is driving around in our sedan.
Right.
In our Realtor-equipped sedan, right? So what's our Realtor-equipped sedan look like? Signs in the trunk, right?
That's right.
So
when you go over a bump, you get to hear the rattle all the time.
right. That's one of the reasons why I don't drive a hatchback or an SUV. I tried doing this in an SUV, and I couldn't get over all the clanging around in the trunk or in the back of the SUV with all the signs riding around with us.
Yep.
The little things that, I mean, I'm sure that doesn't bother some people. You could probably wrap them on blankets or something and keep them from rattling, but it wasn't something I was terribly excited about. So I like them in the trunk, so you don't hear them back there so much. I cleaned my trunk out a couple of weeks ago. You'd never know. You'd never know today because it's pretty messy again.
Because I was coming down here, I took all the trash out of my back seat.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're trying to make a good impression.
Yep.
Fortunately, this wide-angle camera that we're using does not show my back seat, I don't think.
Okay, there you go.
There's, I know there's ink cartridges from our printers in the office laying on the back seat. I'm probably leaking ink all over my back seat, I'm sure. They're supposed to be empty, right? That's why we should be in that business, Bob. Ink cartridges.
Yep, absolutely.
It's like money, license to print money with ink cartridges. So we're heading over to Johnstown for a training session today.
We are.
So what are we going to talk about today, Bob?
I don't know. One of the things that is going to have to be something I don't need slides for. That's going to be difficult because I'm used to using PowerPoint slides.
Okay.
So.
Well, we got a couple of sessions in Johnstown. We're going to be talking about
Yep.
some property management and
Risk management.
risk management, which in real estate these days, I tell our agents, and I know you tell our agents too because you're an associate broker, but they have to practice defensive real estate. Not a whole lot difference than what you hear people say they practice defensive medicine,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I see a lot of times it's very important that we communicate to clients, and not only do we say things to them, but we communicate to them and let them know, say, look, this is what we talked about, just want to jot it down, get a memo out to you to let you know this was what we discussed, because, as realtors, we get information from the other party, and we discuss that with the client, and it's important that I think we memorialize that information. Don't you agree?
I agree, absolutely.
Yes, because memories fade. Have you noticed that?
I've noticed that. Well, I think that there's another way of looking at that. I have picked up a few things from being in court. One of the most important things that I have picked up is that when somebody has to testify, they have advance notice. They give them 30 days or something like that. So they practice their story.
Yes.
They practice it
well rehearsed.
well rehearsed, in the shower, in the car on the way to work, in the car on the way home from work. So, and every part of the story, as they're telling it to themselves, if there's something that just doesn't sound right, well, they modify it a little.
They fill in the blanks a little bit.
That's right.
Okay,
that's right.
got that.
And then they practice that, and when they get to court, they tell the truth, the whole truth, but nothing but the truth, as they know it.
As they
at
remember
that point,
it.
as they have rehearsed
That's
it.
good. That's good. Yeah, because once in a while we get into a little fracas over deposits. People. That's really seems to be the big thing. There's two issues that it seems like clients wind up in going to see the magistrate over, and that's the deposits. Somebody wants to keep the deposit, or they want their deposit back, and whether they're entitled to it or not. And the other one is property disclosure stuff, right? So the condition of the property after closing is, and we actually, I think we've got some things for the property disclosure these days. We started working with a new warranty company, and I've never been really excited about warranties in the past, but this new warranty company actually made me a bit more excited about warranties, because they're doing a couple of things right, I think. One is the biggest frustration with people that bought warranties in the past, they would have to get the approved contractor to come out. There's always a deductible, and then there's this approved contractor. And sometimes that, like areas like we live in, a lot of times they only have one approved contractor. They may not even be from your town. So these people are coming out. It's at the trip charge, and it's somebody maybe doesn't know the area, doesn't have familiarity, that kind of stuff. And that's been a challenge for a lot of folks, that when they get a warranty, it's like, oh, we got to deal with this out of town, contractor. So this new one actually lets you pick your service provider. So if you need a heating guy, heating company to come in, you can pick whoever. I think that's big.
Oh, absolutely.
And then the other thing I noticed that was a big deal, and I'm waiting to see how far this goes, but the notion of stoppages, plumbing, and even leaks, like roof leaks. I've never seen warranty coverage in those areas, and this company's actually covering that kind of stuff. Now, I'm sure there's tons of disclaimers in there and this kind of stuff, but the notion that they'll even attempt to cover some of that stuff, I think, is a big plus. So then there's a third reason, and that's having done a bunch of transactions as a broker. I see a pattern, and that's that the day after closing, some appliance fails. Uh-huh. Have you noticed that pattern, Bob?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, the dishwasher that worked fine for years, the day after closing, the buyer does their first, load of dishes, and the doggone thing, spits water over the floor or something crazy.
Yep.
And, and of course the buyer's upset. They think their seller did them wrong, and the seller, it probably worked fine for the seller for forever, and, it just happened to be that day. I also think that what happens a lot of times is the buyer uses all the systems when they move in, right? So they, everything's rocking and rolling, right? They do a load of laundry, everything's under new stress from the new owner,
sure,
right? And so I think that may contribute a little bit to that. But
and there are idiosyncrasies that the seller has learned to work around. He doesn't even remember them anymore.
That's a good point. I had an oven that the 5 didn't work on. So it was like a touch panel.
Mm-hmm.
It got progressively worse, but we always joke about a phone without a 5. Imagine trying to cook something at 350 degrees without a 5.
That would be tough.
Right. So the panel was like, and this was a known problem with this type of, Google said this was a known problem with this type of oven. So we lived with it when the 5 didn't work. So, instead of cooking something at 350, you could cook it at 340 or 360,
yep,
right? That's close enough. But when I think the 3 went out with it, oh, that was it. It was over. Because, now what do you do? Everything's going to be cooked at 400.
Yep.
That's a problem.
And we have a dishwasher that has 2 settings, the extra powerful set and the normal wash.
Yeah.
And my wife does everything with extra powerful.
Yeah.
And we would not know if the normal didn't work.
That's an excellent point. So again, inspectors, clients pay inspectors to come in and inspect this stuff. They run things through a couple of cycles, but I think it's unrealistic to think it's going to be able to figure that out. So I'm bullish on these warranties now. I think, it's something that's come back around, and we're encouraging sellers. There's a little bit of coverage for the sellers. It's not great. A little bit of coverage while they're listed, like the water heater is covered. And you've been in some of these homes, man, around these parts, if you have a water heater that lasts for more than 10 or 12 years, you feel like you're on borrowed time.
Yep.
So I think that's something. So warranties is, I think, an area that, we as a brokerage didn't really push. We've always had them as available, but I'm encouraging folks more and more. They start out about $400, and they don't really go up much from there. $100, $200, and you get pretty much everything covered.
Yep.
So that's a new development. What else I want to talk about for a minute is pocket listings. NAR has been wrestling with this for a little bit, and I noticed that the articles are coming out. I saw an article on Inman News yesterday. They're talking about pocket listings, and there's a lot of buzz about pocket listings, and whether they're good for consumers, bad for consumers, who's pushing a pocket listing. I think that's what it comes down to a lot of times, is who's behind the pocket listing. Is it the client that's really pushing for this, or are the agents pushing for this? And I noticed that somebody else, I'm going to just get it right out there, somebody else pointed out that the relationship between pocket listings and dual agency, and really just pointed out, so really pocket listings amount to blatant dual agency.
Absolutely.
And so for the folks at home that don't know anything about pocket listing, by the way, I'm driving while we're doing this, but I'm paying close attention to the road, and I've got a co-pilot who's keeping an eye on the road for me. But pocket listings, for those that don't know, is when the broker doesn't market the property on the normal channels. It's when you have a listing and you don't put it in the MLS, for example.
Is that legal?
Well, we're going to talk about that for a second. I'm so surprised you brought that up. So not marketing it right away, not putting it on the MLS, keeping it in-house, so to speak, as an in-house listing for a while, so that you can sell it within the brokerage rather than to the external market. So first of all, let's talk about the reasons why a pocket listing might exist for the benefit of the seller. Some sellers don't want their property to be, they don't want to sign in the yard, and they don't want anybody to know it's for sale. They want it to be quiet. They want to keep it quiet.
Mm-hmm.
I respect the privacy of people that want to sell a home, that don't want really a lot of people traipsing, as we'd say in Southern Pennsylvania, traipsing through their home. But the notion that you're going to sell a house without anybody knowing it's for sale seems difficult.
Silly.
I mean, I think it's really juxtaposes your goal is to get the house sold, but how do you sell something when nobody knows it's for sale? So I mean, how does your agent even do that discreetly? So no one's allowed to know it's for sale. So it's listed with an agent, not on the MLS, not on the internet, not on Realtor.com, not advertised in the paper, no sign in the yard. So how does an agent go about marketing it? Are they allowed to tell other agents? Are they allowed to tell their friends? Can they put it on Facebook? I mean, that would be advertising.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it really puts us in a, the only thing I think you could make an argument is maybe that agent has a buyer or a couple of buyers, a buyer pool that might be interested. But even disclosing that house is for sale to that buyer pool then really lets the cat out of the bag, doesn't it?
Certainly does.
So I think it's near impossible to market a property for sale without letting anybody know it's for sale. So that's, I think, the notion behind why you might not list it. But when you think about the idea that you don't have a property on the MLS, so let's just talk about a pocket listing being one that the client has signed. The client has to sign something that says they do not want it on the MLS.
Right.
Because the MLS participating rules, if you're a broker or a realtor, most MLSs we're members of, I've read the rules. If you have a listing, you have to put it on the MLS. And most of them have rules about how long, time-wise, you have. Sometimes it's 48 hours or 72 hours you have before you're required to get that in the MLS with pictures and the full description, taxes, all that kind of stuff, square footage.
Yep.
Or you get a fine. And so the client can actually sign off and say, no, they don't want that in the MLS. And I scratch my head when I see that. Why wouldn't you want it in the MLS? I mean, let's think about this. The buyer that's going to come is out there somewhere, and so you market it to the most amount of people through the MLS, which gets it on Realtor.com, and in many cases on the other third-party websites like Zillow and Trulia. We call that ZTR, right? Zillow, Trulia, Realtor.com.
Yep.
And so that exposes it to the most amount of people and gets an assign in the yard. Maybe I can see maybe not a sign in the yard. We do that with commercial property. Sometimes we don't want a sign on the building. We want to market it, but they don't necessarily want a sign out that says, "Hey, we're selling. Stop doing business with us."
Yeah,
I get that. But you think about marketing this thing through the traditional MLS route. You're going to get the most amount of exposure. The most amount of buyers are going to come, and the market will then pick the price. So you'll get offers, you'll get counter offers, you get multiple offers, you get bid up, whatever. But if you pocket that listing and your agent brings a buyer, so you price the property and a buyer comes that the agent has as a pocket listing because it's really not marketed, and then you sell the property, how do you know you got your price, the best price for that property? So there's a lot of talk when you get back to, is this legal? I think the challenge is going to be when somebody challenges, and I think it's going to be like an estate, or it's going to be some situation where there's multiple parties involved in a divorce and estate, where somebody comes in and says, wait a second, you pocketed that listing and didn't expose it to the market, and you sold it for less than its fair market value. It may have been what the seller would accept, but it might not have been what the market would have driven it to. And so I think there's going to be a lawsuit. There's going to be tests on this. Somebody's going to sue and say, I didn't get my fair market value. And I think the agent that is going to be wrapped up in that deal. That's just my opinion. Because think about it. Somebody's going to, it's all, there's a broker who's fond of saying, it's not a problem till it's a problem, but then it's a problem, right?
Yep.
And so it's all good while it's good, but days, weeks, months later, somebody, you run into somebody and say, hey, I didn't know that house was for sale. Boy, if I'd have known that house was for sale, I'd have given you X.
Yep.
And they say, well, I didn't take X. I took X minus 20%. And so somebody's going to be sore about that, and they're going to come back, I think. And that's where it's going to get some interesting. That's been talked about a lot. NAR is very concerned that brokers are holding listings, and particularly in a hot market, it's basically, okay, then you can even do this on a small scale without even really calling it a pocket listing. Before you put it on the MLS for 48 hours, you can wait that whole time out and just tell all the other agents, hey, it's for sale, bring your buyers, and literally have it sold by the time it hits the market.
Yep.
And we see this when it happens. If it happens, the way we can tell, it looks like, I'll just, tell you what we think it looks like. It looks like a property that hits the MLS in a pending status.
Yeah.
So it goes on the MLS, and then they immediately mark it pending. Well, how did that happen? You literally, a buyer showed up in seconds? No. It was being marketed in-house and sold in-house before it was ever exposed to the market for the other agents to see. Now, maybe that office saw it, but in most of the markets we work in, I know the primary market we work in and out in the Altoona market in Pennsylvania, roughly 50% of the houses are sold by another brokerage. It's like an even split. So if a broker lists it, it's a flip of a coin that another broker is actually the broker that sells it. So if that's the case, you're missing half your market easily if you don't have it on the MLS, don't you think?
I think yes, and I think that brings up issues of fiduciary responsibility to your seller.
I couldn't agree more.
If you don't expose it to the market, then you can't guarantee to your seller that you're getting them what the market will bear. Right.
Yeah, I think somebody's going to test that, would be my guess. And it's all great, when the market's good now. We're doing this session here. It's April 10th, 2014, and we've thawed out from a really rough winter. The worst winter I can remember since I was a little kid. It was a rough winter. So we've thawed out, and now home sales are, homes are coming on the market. Home sales they're going pending. Well, that's a whole other story, going pending. But they're going under contract and getting sold, and there's not a lot of inventory. I don't know. I know you were out in Reading and Scranton. How's the inventory in those areas?
We've got plenty of inventory. The market hasn't picked up quite so much in eastern Pennsylvania yet.
Okay. Well, that's right. You're in the Poconos too, and that market's just eek.
Yep.
That's just that's rough. I know in a lot of the market, like State College, the agents there are actually sending emails out asking for anybody that might know of a home that's coming on the market. And in the Altoona market, the Blair County market, and certainly in Bedford too, we're seeing situations where people are homes are coming on the market and they're selling in days. We have a lot of buyers who are saying they just can't find the right house because they just don't, the inventory that's out there isn't matching up with what they're looking for.
I still think that brings us back to that fiduciary issue, because in a hot market, If the house is exposed to the marketplace, you can see multiple offers, you can see bidding wars, etc. And when it's a pocket listing, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, how do you get in a bidding war if barely anybody knows? Your agent's one of the few, if any, people that know that it's available for sale. So that really poses a challenge, because now you've got your agent who's your listing agent. And this gets back to that whole dual agency problem. In Pennsylvania, dual agency is permitted. In Florida, where we have an office, it's illegal. It's not. You can't practice dual agency. So if you do get in a situation in Florida where you list a property and a buyer comes that you want to represent, you have to go back to your seller and get them to sign off a paper that says, I no longer represent you. I wonder how that goes. So the idea here is, when we list a property at Perry Wellington, we list it, and our agent will represent the seller. If another agent from Perry Wellington happens to get involved, then that's a designated agent, which means that agent's going to work with that buyer, and those two aren't sharing. They're not sharing notes. They're representing each of their own individual sides, and they're not. They don't know the full information on both sides.
No confidential information can be passed.
Right, exactly. Yep. Yeah. So I mean, you think about that. If you're a dual agent and you know what the seller will take in a pocket listing, they say, hey, I think this would be a good price. And you say, and you find a buyer, and the buyer says, I'd like to offer this price. You basically know that they'll take that price, right?
Yep.
So how do you know? And technically, and this is where the dual agent gets into some challenges. If you read the dual agent rules real closely, agents can't even recommend a price. Right?
That's correct. Yep.
So if you have it listed and a buyer comes along and the buyer says, how much should I offer for this house? You can't tell them how much. You could tell them list price, right?
Yep.
But who feels like they're getting represented as a buyer's agent? If you're representing a buyer and you say to them, oh, I think you should pay list, how do you think that conversation goes?
Not well.
Yeah, I don't know how that's really helping them. It's not representing them. It might be facilitating the transaction, which I think is a different thing altogether. But I think in today's market, realtors prove their value when they advocate for clients and actually do a great job of helping their clients and get them to negotiate their deal and represent the client closely and with skill and knowledge. And I think to step back and say, well, I can't really do any of that stuff because I'm representing the seller in this case, really I think negates a lot of the value of what a realtor does.
Well, and it goes deeper than that. Most of the time when you're talking about the conflicts of dual agency, we always talk about price. How do you recommend price? How do you do this?
Yeah, that's a good point. We do talk about that a lot.
However, if you look at the responsibilities of an agent when they represent a seller versus a buyer, let's just look at an example of a defect of some sort. Not necessarily one that would be considered having to be disclosed, but the seller's agent is responsible to disclose anything that would be material to a buyer.
Right.
A buyer's agent has an added responsibility to point out not necessarily just defects, but anything they see that could affect the value of the property. So if I'm representing the seller, I'm not required to disclose a crack in sheetrock somewhere. But if I'm representing a buyer, I'm going to say, hey, there's a crack in that sheetrock there. We should make sure there's nothing behind that.
Right.
And so dual agency takes on a whole nother level of concern beyond price.
Right.
That has to do with the product itself.
Well, yeah, if you think about, we have little charts when we teach class, and I know since you teach class that, this stuff is really vivid and apparent when you're teaching class all the time, and it's really hard to teach agents and not show the glaring examples of how dual agency is really not understood, I think, a lot. Folks, I think consumers get confused about dual agency. I know agents get confused about dual agency. I think the simplest version of this is if you really just follow the money. I mean, a dual agent is really looking to get paid on both sides of the transaction, and the dual agent represents neither the buyer nor the seller. And I think that's the important thing, that the important distinction a lot of folks don't talk about is who do you represent in the transaction? And the answer to that is neither.
That's correct.
And so, agents aren't going to make them, and I'm not down on agents, I'm not talking negative on agents, I'm just contrasting the practice of dual agency. And that is, to do it correctly by the book, you really have to explain to clients, look, I don't represent you. I'm just here to facilitate the transaction. I'm practically a transaction licensee.
Yeah.
I'm really filling out the forms at this point. I mean, how do I represent a client? And we talk about price a lot. I mean, I use price as a good example because people understand money pretty easy, right? So an offer comes in from the buyer, and you're presenting it to the seller, and the seller says, what do you think? Well, you really can't think about anything, right? What do you recommend? I mean, the buyer made the offer through you, so you should say that's a great offer. But if it's $10,000 less than what the seller wants, well, how do you recommend to the seller that they should take it? I mean, I like price in those examples because it's, everybody understands the money part.
Yep.
Of like, so the dual agent can't actually say, they just have to say whatever you think.
Yep.
Right? And so I think, I know we talk about dual agency a bit, but I think it's absolutely a distinction. It's a distinctive for us at Perry Wellington because we practice designated agency, which we split the agency with two different agents who keep the confidential information for the buyer and for the seller. And I think that's critically important. But this pocket listing thing, just kind of maybe wrap up the whole thoughts on pocket listing. This pocket listing thing, it's growing. There's actually pocket listing networks now. I've been reading up on this, where there's like pocket listing exchanges. So like agents will exchange pocket listings with other agents and say, hey, I've got these, I know you're an agent in this office, I'm an agent in this office, we're not marketing these, but if you know anybody, bring us a buyer. Now that will help bring a buyer outside of the dual agent situation. But I think most of what we're seeing in the pocket listings situation is, in my estimation, if an agent's recommending a pocket listing, it's for the benefit of the agent. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, there's no doubt. Or we would like to think it's because the agent is smart enough, sharp enough to recognize that it's more money for him. But some of my experience is that when an agent gets into a pocket listing situation, the client says, I don't want a sign, I don't want a lockbox, I don't want advertising. The agent's not strong enough to help the client to understand that he's making a bad decision.
Right. So we have to kind of stand our ground as agents and say, because here's the other thing. We are in this with the client. We want the client to be successful because let's face it, we want to be successful. So, we want to get their house sold. We want to, claim success. We want to be paid our commission because we did the job. I think that's reasonable. And so we have to do those things that help achieve the outcome of getting the house sold. And I like to achieve the outcome that it gets them their best price. So,
absolutely.
So we spend a lot of time and effort making sure that not only do we drive the best price through multiple offers, through marketing, and many, we market in ways that a lot of folks just don't market. And we wind up charging our 4.5% commission is fantastic given the amount of marketing that we do. And we want to get our seller the best net price, the best net, which, part of that is the commission. Not only, a lot of times people just look at the price, but what people forget about is since they're paying us less commission, their net is automatically higher, right?
Yep.
So two townhouses sitting side by side might have sold for $150,000, but if they sold it through us, the seller that sold through us got a better net, right? And absolutely. I think that's a lot of folks that are, I got my price, but did you? You didn't get your net. The net from us would have saved you $2,250 over a 6% broker, and that, $150,000, that matters.
Yeah, sure.
That matters anywhere. $2,250. So there's that whole piece of it. So I think this pocket listing thing, I think it also creates a situation where the agent gets the listing and then it harms the other agents that are part of this cooperative, this MLS, that don't get access to selling that property.
Absolutely.
Who may have a buyer who is working looking for a home, and I can see where buyers would get upset about that. But it's interesting, though. I hear stories where buyers are really eager to talk to agents about properties that are not yet on the market. Did you come across that? Buyers are really eager. They want that first look. They want to know what nobody else knows about it. They want to. Oh, this is a house that's about to be listed, or a house that just got listed that nobody else knows about yet. Ooh, that sounds intriguing. But the problem with that is, are they going to overpay for that property? Perhaps. I mean, that might help the seller in that case. But if it's not exposed to the market and you don't get to see it's on the market for 30 or 40 or 80 days, the buyer in haste might overpay, right? And on the flip side, the seller might get way less than what they could. I mean, so there's not exposing it to the market, I think, is really where
I agree 100%.
Is really where the danger comes in. So, pocket listings. These are terms as consumers you just don't get to hear all the time. As agents, we talk about them, and it's a growing thing, this pocket listing thing. NARs are really concerned about it. They have not put a policy statement out on it at this stage of the game. It's come up at the last couple of meetings on a national level, and the articles that are being written about it, I think, generally are negative on. They talk about why you might do it, but I think as a practice, a lot of critics are saying that this is really undermining the MLS, and realtors now more than ever need to band together to continue to prove their value and show the value that they bring to the transaction. And I think by pocketing listings and bypassing the MLS, I think it's really a disservice to other brokerages. Would you agree?
I would. And the seller.
And I think that's really where this is coming from. We represent the clients, we represent our sellers, and it's our job to do the best job for the consumer, or else we're just not going to be here, are we?
That's correct.
If we don't help customers and help them achieve their outcomes, we're not going to be in business for very long. So
how do you justify collecting a commission if you haven't given your best effort to sell a house?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you may have accomplished the goal. You may have put it under contract, but how do you know you got your best price?
Yep.
How do you know? That you achieved the best possible outcome. It's not a lot different. Really take us off on a different tangent. It's really not a lot different than companies that are successful. You look at companies that are successful, sometimes you say, are companies successful because they're at the right place at the right time? The market was great when they were in the market, they entered the market. You don't really, I think in a lot of cases, you don't know that a company is really a great company until it's been stressed by a decline or a turn in the business. That's how I think a lot of times because when things are riding up and things are riding high, that covers a lot of mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I think just by virtue of the fact that you sold a house, to go back to the house part, you sold the house, and I hear this from sellers a lot of times. Well, they were a dual agent, but they did sell my house. My question is, how do you know you sold it for as much as you could have? Right? How do you know that? And so I think that's what my concern is. So any other thoughts on this whole pocket listing thing?
Well, I think we pretty much covered that issue.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's probably about a half an hour of chatting. We're getting close to our destination. We've just a second ago we had a truck that was pelting us with all kinds of stuff. It was getting a little distracting. We actually had a cardboard box at the windshield. That was kind of interesting. You didn't get to see that at home. You might have saw that in a rearview mirror or behind us whenever it flew up over the car. And we managed to actually follow traffic signals and speed control. So that winds up being a good morning so far.
I'm impressed.
What do you think?
It worked out well.
All right, good. So this is our first episode of Realtors in Cars drinking coffee. And I don't want to get sued by the comedians in cars getting coffee, but just a little chat as we're on our way over to Johnstown this morning. Thanks for joining us. We'll have to turn this thing off sometime.